I'm into this sermon series called Tough-Minded Jesus, and I have a prejudice here. Through the years, one of the things that has irritated me the most is the stereotype that a lot of people have that Christians are soft, and that Jesus himself was soft. When in fact, the opposite is true. Jesus was the toughest man who ever lived, mentally and physically. Also the most compassionate. You combine those two, toughness and compassion, that's what you get when you get Jesus. And so it's important, I think, for us to remind ourselves every now and then about how Jesus was not only compassionate, but extremely tough. And this is one of the best stories in the Bible, I think, with which to do it. We turn to the Gospel of John, the 5th chapter, the first 8 or 9 verses of chapter 5. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha. That's the way it's written in this particular translation. You'll find other translations, and of course, Bethesda is a derivative of this word. It has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up." It was rumored that when the waters were stirred up and bubbling, it was probably some kind of an underground spring, that the waters had a healing power. But he says, "And while I'm making my way into the water, someone else steps down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat, and he began to walk. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One day several years ago, I had my older grandson Liam with me, and we were sitting out in the backyard. It was a really pretty nice, clear day like the one today. He's 7 now. I think he was probably about 3 at the time. And we were enjoying the weather, and all of a sudden I heard an airplane coming over. I looked up, and it was a big airliner flying pretty low. It was real visible. And so I pointed out to him. I said, "Liam, look at the airplane." He looked up there. He said, "Yeah, Dee Dee, I see it." I said, "Where do you think all those people are going?" And without missing a beat, he said, "To the airport." It was in that moment that I fully understood the remarkable truth that intelligence is inherited. But it's important to know where you're going in life, isn't it? I mean, if you stop and think about it, there really are very few things more important to most of us than having some clarity, some sense about what it is we want to do in life, at least about which direction we want to go in life. There's nothing worse than being confused about that. A number of years ago, probably 25 or more years ago, because our church was much smaller, my wife Bobby and I had the graduating seniors, the high school seniors, over to our home, in May, right before they graduated. And we had a little celebration. I think we had cake and cookies and stuff like that. And then we were sitting around in the living room, and everybody was sitting on the floor on cushions and chairs. And we went around the room, and I asked each of our graduating seniors what they were planning to do after graduation. It was interesting. Almost all of them were going to college. 2 or 3 of them were going to work for a while before they went to college. And they didn't all have clarity. And let me just say to you, I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated from high school. Even when I graduated from college, I wasn't sure. So you don't have to have clarity at that point in your life. But I'll always remember this. 2 or 3 of them were just amazing. One young woman, graduating senior, she said, "I'm going to go to Texas A&M University. I'm going to major in biology and chemistry, and then I'm going to go to medical school. I'm going to become a pediatric neurologist." And she did. Another young man, I'll always remember this, very gifted mathematician. He said, "I'm going to go to college, I'm going to major in math, and then I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to make a lot of money." A lot of money. He had great clarity about that. And he's done it. He's the manager of a hedge fund, and he's made a lot of money. And so we understand, don't we, that it really is important to have some clarity. When we have some clarity about who we want to be and about where we want to go and about what we want to do, then at least we start making progress on our journey. But if you're missing that clarity, you just end up in a state of passivity, waiting. And that's what was taking place in this particular story about this man sitting at this pool. He was paralyzed. He had been paralyzed for 38 years, and he'd been sitting there all of those years, kind of caught in this state of passivity. Jesus comes up to him and he says, in essence, he says, "Do you want to be healed?" In a real way, he was saying, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go with your life? What is the meaning of your life? And I don't know whether you picked this up when we read the scripture a moment ago, but Jesus asked this very direct question: do you want to be healed, yes or no? And the man does not answer the question. He doesn't answer the question. Instead, he tells a story. It's a story about being a victim. He says, well, you know, I've been here for a long time, and every time the waters start boiling up, I start on my way down there, but other people get in front of me, and by the time I get down there, the waters are calm again, and so here I am. He has been caught in this state of passivity for 38 years, and he has made no progress whatsoever. One believes that he's probably has gotten used to simply being a victim, just waiting around. And look, this is one of the problems with the way in which a lot of people interpret the gospel, the story of Jesus. I think a lot of people believe that being faithful means just waiting around for God to change your life. And you can kind of understand that. If you read through the Gospels, starting with Matthew, you see Jesus walking through the Gospels, and he was always in a hurry. He was always going someplace. He had clarity about what it was he was trying to accomplish in life. And so he'd come along and he'd see a blind man, and he'd put his hand on him and he'd heal him. He said, get on, go on with your life. Or a paralyzed man, he said, get up and walk. Or lepers, he'd come across some lepers and he would touch them and heal them. Said, now get on with your life. And so I think that a lot of people, when things aren't going well, they just kind of withdraw into this state of passivity, and they think that being faithful is just sitting there and waiting until Jesus comes along and rescues you. This is the story that tells us that just isn't true. Jesus confronts this man and says, if you want to be healed, then get up. Get up and move on with your life. Do your part. You can do it. There's an old country saying, a lot of you have heard this, that the biggest troublemaker in your life is the person who stares at you each morning when you look in the mirror. You know that, don't you? The biggest troublemaker is the one who's looking at you in the mirror every morning. Last week I quoted Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer said there's two kinds of people in the world, those who are helpers and those who are not. Well, there are a lot of ways of dividing the world, and some of you have heard me say this before. Another way of talking about the division in the world is this. There are two kinds of people in the world, those who need to take some control in life, and those who need to give up some control in their lives. And you know which one you are, don't you? If you don't, if you're confused about that at all, if you're married, ask your spouse. She will tell you. So the ones who need to give up some control in life, this is really, really simple, and I understand this really well because I fall into that category. We tend to be impulsive. We tend to shoot before we aim. We tend to be obsessive, compulsive perfectionists. And when we pray, we always hear God saying, listen, you are not in charge. I am. So the challenge is to give up some control in life. And I've preached lots of sermons for people like that, people like me, and I'll preach some more in the future. But today's sermon is for the other half of you who need to take up some control in life. And again, you know who you are. There is this tendency to be passive in life and to sit around waiting for something or someone to come along and change the circumstances of life. And what this passage tells us is that it is the expectation of Jesus that we gain some clarity about what we want to do, who we want to be as the children of God, and we get up and do something. So is your marriage falling apart? Then do something about it. Go to a therapist maybe. Those of you who have been to a therapist before, have you ever noticed that one of the first questions a good therapist will ask you is, what do you want? What do you want? That's the question Jesus asked. What do you want? Do you want to be healed? If you're suffering from addiction, you can sit around and pray all day for Jesus to rescue you, but what Jesus wants you to do maybe is to go to a 12-step group. If you're bored with life, get up out of bed and do something. But we can go right on down our list. We understand that Jesus is tough-minded enough, that Jesus challenges us to get on with life, to make a difference. But it's really important when we get to this point that Jesus was this remarkable combination, not only tough-minded, but also compassionate. When you combine those two things in the same person, the most compassionate man who ever lived and one who is as tough as ever lived, that's what you get. You get Jesus. And you find there the great encourager. If you've been around for a while, you know I love that word, encourage. It's derived from the French word courage, which means heart. And so when you say the word encourage, it means put the heart back in. That's what Jesus does. Jesus encourages us. He puts the heart back in. Get up and move on with your life. And compassionate Jesus is always there to confront us and to challenge us, but also to encourage us. From the time that I was in the second grade through the time that I was starting into my freshman year in high school, my father was the associate minister at First Methodist Church, downtown Dallas. In those days, the senior minister was a man by the name of Robert E. Goodrich Jr., Bob Goodrich Jr., arguably one of the greatest preachers in Methodism in the last half of the 20th century. Remarkable preacher. When I was in seminary, in graduate school at SMU, I went back to First Methodist Dallas and worked for Bob Goodrich. He was still there. He was there for 26 years. And I worked for him. And one day I got to figuring this up. I was really surprised. I realized that I'd heard more sermons by Bob Goodrich than I heard of my own father. But when I was working for him as an adult, when I was in seminary, I started paying attention to his sermons. And they were just amazing. I couldn't figure out what is it about these sermons that are just so compelling. And I remember asking a friend of mine, her name was Elaine. She was about 10 years older than I. She was in her mid-30s, and she was a Bob Goodrich fan, and she was a very careful listener of sermons. And I asked her one time, I said, Elaine, what is it about the sermons of Dr. Goodrich that make them so powerful? And she said, I've thought about that a lot. I really don't know. I can't completely understand it. All I can tell you is this. When the sermon is over on Sunday mornings and I get up and I get ready to leave church and face the week that is ahead of me, I always think that I can do it. I always think, now I can do it. And I always thought that was about as great a compliment as you could ever give a preacher, because that's exactly who Jesus was. You find Jesus walking through the pages of the New Testament, and it doesn't make any difference what the encounter is. Jesus always encounters people. Sometimes he confronts someone like he did in this passage with this man at the pool of Bethesda, but he always encourages them. He says, get up and walk. You can do it. Tough and compassionate Jesus, the one who helps us gain clarity about who we are and what we can do in life, who encourages us to get up, move on with life. You can do it. A number of years ago, I was watching television, probably more than 20 years ago, because I remember Jim Henson was still alive. Do you remember the Muppets and Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets? A man was leaving this morning. He said his wife went to art school with Jim Henson. It's remarkable, I think. But at any rate, I was watching television one night and a show came on. I don't even remember the rest of the show, so I don't know whether it was a documentary or I think maybe it was a celebration of the Muppets and of the life and contributions of Jim Henson. The Muppets used to sing this song every day on TV. They'd sing this song, you can do it, or I can do it, I can do it. And I remember that there was this moment during this celebration when Jim Henson was out there and the Muppets were on stage, and a man came walking out onto stage and he was carrying his 3-year-old daughter. And she had braces on her legs. And he said, Mr. Henson, when our daughter was born, the doctors told us that she would never, ever walk. But every morning she gets up and she watches the Muppets on TV. And when they start singing, I can do it, I can do it, she sings along with them. I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And he took his little 3-year-old daughter and he put her down on the floor. And there she walked across the stage. And he turned to Jim Henson and he said, because of you, our daughter can walk. I wonder how many people have met that Jesus. Tough and compassionate Jesus, who can say, because of you, I still have my marriage. Or because of you, I survived and thrived after the loss of my marriage. Because of you, I got up and did something and I am sober today. Because of you, tough and compassionate Jesus, I have clarity about who I am and who I'm called to be and where I'm going in life. Tough, compassionate Jesus, the one who comes to us in our most discouraging moments and challenges us by saying, get up and walk. Get up and walk. You can do it.